Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great webinar from the team at Reuters Events for the insurance space. We are talking today about how to communicate, automate, and upskill seamless CX for the last mile of insurance. The last mile of insurance can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts, but what we're really talking about is whatever tools we put in place, whatever new customer experience investments we've been making, we have to think holistically about that throughout the life cycle, throughout the journey for that customer, because getting it right in the first 95% or 99% of the time, if we fail in that last moment, that's unfortunately the piece that they remember and they take forward. So how do we think much more holistically about the entire journey and make sure that we are delivering the customer experience that people have really come to expect, and maybe in some cases even getting ahead of the bar that customers have been raising for us over the past few years. I'm your moderator today. I'm Brian Felchuck. I'm the managing partner of Insurance Evolution Partners and the author of the book series, The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Evolution. And I am joined by a fantastic panel today. We have a great mix of P&C and life and annuities and disabilities folks here for you today, which is a treat that we're going to span both sides of the insurance spectrum and get some perspectives on what are very different customer journeys and customer situations that lots of people face in lots of carrier space. I want to give you a sense of the panel, and then I'm going to remind you throughout to ask your questions. That's why we've brought this panel together. Each one of them will give you some opening thoughts that maybe wet your whistle a little bit on ideas to think about, to ask us to discuss more. You don't have to wait till we get to the Q&A section. You can hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and ask your question at any point. I will keep my eye on there and make sure we're posing it to the panel so that we can all talk about the things that you care about and want to hear about today. So very strong push, ask your questions. That's what everyone is gathered here for today. But on the panel, we have Satpreet Singh, who is the CIO of Dental and Vision for Aflac. We have Charlie Wendland, who's the head of claims for Branch Insurance. We have Tina Whitney, who is the digital experience lead for customer experience at Mass Mutual. We have Mark Seach, who's the chief customer experience officer for Berkeley Fire and Marine, and Chris Clausen, who's the executive director of digital payment solutions for Deluxe. So really broad perspective across a number of different things that I know so many of you in the audience face. This is your chance to talk to the experts, the people who are living this every day as well, and ask those questions so that we can dig in further. But with that, let's get some opening thoughts from everyone. Satpreet, if you don't mind starting things off for us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Reuters, for the opportunity to speak today. As being part of the technology organization, sometimes there's a tendency to say, well, the ideas are going to come out from wherever, and then we'll deliver it to the technology to go and execute on. And what I think, especially from a customer experience perspective, we need to embrace that experience with all the teams that are part of the process. And so I've been fortunate enough to be able to get extensive experience in the healthcare space, and prior to joining Aflac in the dental and vision business that they've actually started to push out. We dealt with consumers from a medical side, and thinking about that journey from start to finish, just like you said, Brian, is so critical. And you're 100% right. The thing that is remembered is that last piece, right? Well, how did I get that either communication or what are the hoops that I had to go through to submit claims or what have you as well? And so the CX area is actually something that I enjoy and like to learn about as well. So in my space specifically, we talk about the providers as a persona. We also talk about the consumers, the members who are utilizing the insurance products as well, and the differences that need to be considered on what they would care about. And what sometimes what sounds good on paper in practicality ends up being not so, right? And so genericizing, I find that experience is actually not a good experience. And so catering to the specific needs is something certainly that we embrace quite a bit, and think about how do we become pro-provider, how do we become pro-member, how do we become pro-broker or agent, et cetera, as well in our space. And so the last thing that I'll mention is, Aflac as an organization looks at experience from an employee perspective as well, and I think that's really what helps with the company to have that experience built into the DNA of how they operate, right? And so if you have happier and satisfied employees, you're able to provide that excellent service to the consumers as well. So I'm looking forward to the questions as well, and certainly learning a little bit more even from my panelist partners.
Sefri, you said a few things that really stood out to me that I definitely want to get into with everybody, but this notion of generalizing, which is something so often we've sort of had the excuse of, well, we have to do that because we can't customize the experience for everyone. But that doesn't have to mean that we dumb it down to kind of the lowest common denominator. And you mentioned all of these different, and I'm going to use the term customer, and I know technically they may not all be the customer, but they're customers or consumers of the experiences we put out, our distribution partners, the end insured, in your space, the employer who may sit between those two, the providers, body shops on one side and contractors, medical providers, dentists, optometrists, opticians, all these different consumers of what we're putting out there. How do you generalize across all that? So you're absolutely right. Very dangerous mentality when you realize how broad it is. And that's not even thinking about our own employees, right? That's another consumer of these experiences, or the backlash of the experiences we might put out publicly. Right. So great food for thought. And I hope that people have some questions to dig into that, because that's one of the things we all struggle with, is getting that specificity, but also doing it in a scalable way. It's the reality of resourcing. Thank you for that. Charlie, I'm going to turn to you next. Branch, people who don't know, maybe you give a little high level on you, but bring P&C and personal lines perspective.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. And thanks again for having me. My name is Charlie Wendland. I'm the head of claims for Branch. We're a full stack insurance company that uses data, tech, and automation to make home and auto insurance simpler to buy and less expensive, and frictionless to acquire. So with just the customer's name and address, they can bundle their home and auto instantly. And so that creates a pretty big task on the claims side. We have to replicate that experience because we've set the expectation that this is going to be easy the whole way through. And so the way we think about implementing tech in the claims process is to automate the administrative. And kind of to Satpreet's point, we're not only looking at external customer experience, but also the internal customer experience as well, our own employees. How can we relieve them of administrative burden so they can spend more time providing white glove service or focusing on real complex issues? And in the P&C space, it's been a really interesting evolution because we have relied heavily on face-to-face interaction for so many years. And we're seeing a significant shift now to digitizing more of the claims process to varying results, quite frankly. And some of that was brought on by COVID, and some of that was in the works and accelerated by COVID. And we've noticed now that some of those evolutions have become table stakes now. And in some places, we've gone back to the way that we've done business before. So thanks again for having me. Really excited about this discussion.
I appreciate the humility that some of the things we put in, have gone really well, but some of them have not, and we should be rethinking that. But this notion of the in-person, I think, is another important one. That insurance is something that has historically always had some in-person component, whether it's buying in person or the claim, something's happening in person. In so many situations, and there's always that empathy potential there. We want to make sure we don't lose that, but we also want to speed things up. Automating the administrative, I think that's a great way of putting it. It's not about automating out everyone out of a job. It's about taking out the busy work so the people can actually make a difference. But these are the things that we struggle with. And Tina, I want to turn to you next. And that in person, we think about what Mass Mutual offers out to the market. It is much more of an advised product. There's your financial planner, a financial advisor. I happen to be a Mass Mutual customer, and I love my financial planner. He's fantastic. But that's a relationship thing. And so we think about what it means to digitize that or automate that or smooth it out. There's even more, I think, of a sense of, wait a second, this is like the fundamental of the whole nature of how we operate. Is that something that you face every day and think about as you look at the digital evolution of the customer experience in your space?
Absolutely. And when you think about our products, they tend to be longer term, right? So We could have products on the books for years upon years, and we have to be thoughtful in how we're digitizing because of that, and more thoughtful. But really, I agree that that's a focus point for us as well. And for me, my journey really in the claims aspect of it, and I run teams now that digitize all sorts of experiences, not just the claims experience, but the claims experience really started in 2013 for me, where I was leading teams in claims, and we were looking at ways of innovating the processes, creating efficiencies within them. And for anybody who understands these life insurance DI claims processes, they're some of the most rigorous and long and complex processes. And unfortunately, they're also some of the hardest periods of time for a customer in terms of they're dealing with death, they're dealing with loss of their ability to provide for their families, loss of careers. So it's almost like a perfect storm of trying to simplify the complex for our customers. And so it was in those years where I really started to chip away at this, and now continue to over in our customer experience organization.
Was much more to dig into in that, but
Yeah.
it's, I think having been a practitioner in it, obviously serves you really well to understand what is it we need to achieve, and what's the net effect of that, versus just being sort of like, oh, just digitize that. There's a lot more to it than that. There's the feeling of the experience, and I think everyone here is really adding that to the discussions. Thank you very much, Tina. Mark, I want to turn to you next, and we're back to PNC with you, but a very different space than Branch is operating in. Love your comments and perspective.
Yeah, it's been interesting since I've been at Berkeley Fire and Marine, because it's my first, venture into a specialized commercial unit, right? Where my past has all been small commercial, mid-market, or personalized P&C. And specifically even on the distribution side, whenever we were looking at innovation and kind of how do you digitize some of those processes when you think of customer experience, whether that's for the agent or even the policyholder. Moving into an actual customer experience role, obviously then expands all that to claims and everything else. And it's just surprising to see the nuances that I have to work with within this inland marine space. It's, I always kind of joke that if innovation as a whole is like a train, I feel like insurance tends to be backed by that caboose as it is. Like it's already kind of coming from behind. And then I feel like inland marine's like hanging off the back of that caboose like Bolt. If any of you have kids and kind of watch that, it's literally like barely hanging on at times because it's still very non-regulated. It doesn't have all the requirements that you see with normal traditional filed products in all the states. Like it's a lot more flexibility, which then creates a challenge when you're trying to streamline consistent experiences, right? So it's been an interesting challenge there. But even seeing other stuff out there. But I think Carrier Management just put out a white paper where they kind of ranked the top 10 things that are where agents want to see carriers invest for better experiences. And typical ones for agents, right? Policyholders, policy issuance, rate quote bind, and then I think claims was number 3. But still out of 10, I was surprised claims made it that high. And then you look at that, that's the agent perspective. I'm looking at a policyholder perspective. Yeah, policy issuance easy is there, but claims is probably right there, if not number 1, because that's when they care, right? That's the moment of truth for all of us whenever we're now delivering on what they've been paying for. And I feel like it's been neglected to some extent. And in inland marine, it's tough for us just because of the unique things that we see. I mean, it's just crazy at times. So you could have a helicopter being delivered on a cargo, truck across the country and it gets damaged. Well, now you got engineers involved, you got all this stuff. It's large claims at times, right? And it's hard to just automate, make that super simple. I always joke and think about how, pizza delivery companies, they give you this very quick step thing for something that happens in 30 to 45 minutes. I mean, I know if Sally is now moving my pizza to the oven, right? Like you can see that in a quick app. My stuff might take months. Like, how do I give that same kind of experience expectation? So we've been really looking at, not all customer experience enhancements need to be tech, right? It can be humanizing, it can be process, it can be how are they interacting with you? And we just got to make sure that we're solving for that, whether it's tech, process, interaction, it's just got to be the best that it can be. So feedback, trying to understand what processes or opportunities are. We've just been digging deep to try to find out where that's at today. And I would say we're probably fairly early on our journey from a claim side, but recognize with some rapid experiments and doing some innovation to see where can we make improvements.
Well, I think that perspective is really valuable because we often think it's an individual product issue, whether that's personal lines or individual life or individual disability, through employees or not. We're getting down to a consumer level product. I can't imagine there's like Sikorsky has moved the rotors, I don't know, some key, helicopter part through this part of the process to the mechanic, like the whole pizza delivery app thing that's come up a ton in the past couple of years. I don't even know how that applies, but it doesn't mean it doesn't. And that's the key, is you're talking about a much more complex and kind of often risk engineered or, much more complicated risk kind of world. And you're still thinking about CX. You're still thinking about, maybe it means something different, but it doesn't mean we don't do it. So I appreciate that. I told everyone we have a very wide array of perspectives, but they all matter. Thank you for that, Mark. Chris, speaking of wide arrays, you see across lots of different carriers, lots of different contexts, different solution providers the carriers are trying to pay, the customers, the whole mix of it. I'd love to get your perspective from Deluxe.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for having us here today. This is a great topic. One of the things that's interesting about Deluxe and allows me to bring some fun insights to this discussion is that we actually work with 4.5 million small, medium, and large size business customers making payments each and every day. And we have an existing book of business that is predicated on insurance payments. It's focused on everything from healthcare claims to property casualty to even financial planning. So some of the themes that I've been hearing today resonate really strongly. Supreet talked a little bit about not overly generalizing across the experiences. And one of the things that we've noticed is that the moment at which payment is made is so crucial to a customer overall feeling about the party that they're dealing with. Usually it's associated with an event that they have very strong emotional impact with. Tina did a great job of kind of highlighting that within, what she talked about. And so that moment of payment can amplify how they feel about the carrier that they're dealing with, or it can really turn that recipient off. And so some of the things that we see in our experience is that it's very, very important that you don't overly generalize, that you give those payees choice. Choice is really important. People have come to expect that in their other parts of their consumer life. But choice is a complicated process within customer experience, giving them enough flexibility that they are happy about the experience. They're not necessarily having to change their paradigm of how they interact with a payment system. So what we tend to see is you want to offer choice, different types of payment modalities within the experience. But at the same time, you don't want to go too far down that spectrum. You got to recognize that if you offer too many choices, those payees get overwhelmed. They feel like it's too complex. So it's a really important balancing act. But what we see, particularly, for carriers, is that the moment of payment is an opportunity to differentiate yourself in such a fantastic way and really be there, whether it's for a provider, supplier who is just exhausted by the number of carriers that they have to deal with and all the different variety of payments that they have to support, all the way to the consumer who maybe is experiencing a tragic event in their life or a disaster that they have very strong feelings about. And if it's easy and simple and quick and clearly intuitive, you can really create a really positive resonation with your brand. So that's kind of, I'm bringing up the tail end of the spectrum, and the folks who've gone before me have done a great job of kind of highlighting the breadth of what they deal with, but those common themes come through to me over and over again. So my fellow panelists are spot on.
Thank you for that the perspective and the specifics at that final moment, around payment in particular, and that can take many different forms, many different shapes, but balancing choice with also not overwhelming or confusing them, or how you help them navigate making that choice the one that's best for them. That's a critical one too. You can't just throw out everything and be like, here, you pick. Well, I appreciate all that. We're gonna move into the Q&A, which is a subtle reminder for the audience to ask your questions, pop them into the Q&A box. I've got some to start us off, and Sapri, you open this idea off, this generalization and the sort of flip side balance is over customization. I wonder for each of you, and Sapri, we'll start with you, examples of where this has come up and how have you navigated that, either facing excessive generalization or having to figure out, how do we have something that is scalable and we can actually deploy, but still meaningful and valuable to the customers and giving them the right level of choice in how they navigate.
Yeah, and a couple of things come to mind, right? So one, I'll piggyback on what Chris said as far as that feeling, and especially in insurance, there is certainly a claims, a payment component of it. And, we think about, at least in the Aflac Dental Vision space, right? If we are a pro-provider pair, which by the way is not the norm, right? There's this healthy tension that exists between peers and providers. But if we do say, look, let's look at it from the lens of a provider. They want to deal with insurance companies as little as possible, right? And so there is a feeling of dealing with that organization. And if we can make that experience as pleasant or as minimal maybe as possible, then that's gonna really result in a good impression. And how does that good impression then move into a member experience? Is, look, if you go to your dentist, right, and you give the Aflac ID card, and here you go, and the reaction from the office manager or the receptionist is like, oh, I hate working with these guys. That has nothing to do with their service that they're going to get. It has nothing to do with their cleaning, right? It has nothing to do with their plan. But all of a sudden, a perceived expert of the industry is sort of denouncing their choice of plan, right? Of course, the flip is true, right? When that experience of that office manager is positive, and they're like, oh, I love working with these guys, which is what we strive for, right? Then all of a sudden, it just sets the right tone for that rest of the service that's going to get rendered. And so I think being able to embrace that and know that, look, one solution for a broker or provider or any of those personas, right, any of those customers, isn't what's going to work for every one of them. And even, I'll say, even in the provider space, right, you got your mom and pop, small provider, dentist office that sort of manages everything locally. You got your large DSOs, which are like these dental services organizations that have multiple sort of locations, et cetera. You can't just say, well, everybody's going to want the same thing, right? And they will just roll it out and that's it. I think being able to think about it from their shoes becomes so critical. To be able to sort of develop these solutions that work for that particular group of people. Again, not maybe custom to each individual person that's engaged in it, but at least that grouping, that profile for all intents and purposes becomes a key factor in how we want to look at customer experience.
Sapri, I have a dentist appointment tomorrow. It's actually for my son, and I had to update our dental information. And when I called in to do that, one of the options in their phone tree is, for insurance. And when you get there, then the message says insurance. We all hate it, right? And I was like, wait a second, this is terrible. Yeah. But to your point, right, that's the message that's being sent out. And so we have to make sure, maybe it's only one carrier at a time, but giving those providers a different experience so they're not fueling that sort of like overused trope of insurance companies are terrible or hard to deal with. And, we need the providers to be on side as well, whether that's a medical provider or a body shop or a contractor or anyone. They're also our ambassadors in a lot of ways. Absolutely. Of fueling or changing things. Yeah, great point. If someone wants to jump in, by all means, I'm still going to hit everyone, and I'm happy to choose. But if someone had a point they wanted to add to that, I can certainly go to you next. If not, I'll just keep going around. Charlie, if you want to add to this sort of generalization versus hyper customization balance that we try to strike.
Yeah, it is interesting because we have done so much research on customer expectations. I mean, we've done our own internal research where we have actually surveyed our policyholders to see what their expectations are of the claims process and how do they think about self-service, because that's what we're talking about with a lot of this stuff when we digitize P&C is what are they comfortable doing themselves, and what maybe aren't they comfortable with. And so we took that research along with the industry research, and that has helped us formulate a lot of opinions on how we think about automating parts of the claims process or allowing them to drive a lot of it too. And the one thing that was brought up was the pizza tracker. I think this is a huge one, right? Allowing the user to self-serve, to understand where are we at in our claims? Because throughout my career, the number one complaints I've heard is, I don't know what's happening with my claim and my adjuster's not calling me back, right? And so how can we allow them that insight to self-serve, which is a very comfortable process, to make the UI really, really strong, where they don't feel overwhelmed by the information that's there. I think that's a great opportunity for pretty much every company within our industry to allow that type of user experience. And it makes the adjuster's job so much easier too, because look, I'm going to say something really profound. I'm going to blow everyone's mind. Claims is a stressful business, okay? And so why make it needlessly stressful for the adjuster where their phone's ringing off the hook and their inbox is just flooded with what's going on with my claim, what's going on with my claim? Why not look to, as I said at the onset, automate the administrative of, I have these claims on my diary today in 20 different states. I think I have to send status letters, like highly administrative. Like, can we take that away from them? And then on the user side, not only does it benefit them because the adjuster now is able to proactively call out to tell them what's going on with their claim if they're not comfortable with self-serving. It's just a better experience all the way around to not only automate that administrative portion for the adjuster side primarily, in my opinion, but also for the user side as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and it has trickle down effects no matter where you do it. But thinking about what the adjuster's saddled with, and then they're not giving all those updates or engaging in the things that would generate an update because they move the file forward.
Yeah, you can't work your desk by just putting out fires all day long.
Yeah.
We need to enable the staff so they can be proactive and provide the utmost customer care.
Yeah, absolutely. Tina, you live this stuff firsthand, and then trying to make those changes across the board. What's your perspective on the generalization versus customization kind of battle?
We do try to personalize as much as we can and strike a balance. How do we use the data that we have for our customers to personalize the dashboard when they log in? What life events have happened? What are they here to do? They're here to do something. Can we present those? Does the dashboard look a little different for the person who's coming in who perhaps has had the policy for a really long time and is moving? And how do we anticipate that, understand that, and present a different experience to that person versus somebody else, depending on where they are in their journey. So we do take that into account. And then there's also the difference in roles. And we talked about that here too. There's, the financial professional who might need to come in and do some self-servicing on behalf of the customer. There's the customer who also is coming in perhaps to do self-service. They need to see the same data. You don't want them to be seeing something different and then all of a sudden the trust is broken. It's like, well, wait, why are there different experiences here? But the views might be a little different. The advisor might need to see and should see less perhaps than the customer sees. And so we have to take that into account, but we do work off of scalable technology and infrastructure so that we can provide and ensure we're showing the same data so that we can scale, so that we're not replicating our infrastructure, our APIs, and so that we're building off of the same and working more off of permissions and being smart that way. So there's efficiencies in technology as well. So we're definitely, there's a balance for sure in terms of generalization versus personalization, but it is something we obsess over.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned these sort of the underlying architectural pieces that, you know, you need to get these things in place so that you can enable a much more flexible response to the various needs of all those different constituents.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the battles many carriers have faced around legacy technology and what does it constrain. But there's also been some new tools, even if you still have your legacy tech, that allow the flexibility. But you need to think about that. It's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, I'm not going to harp on the helicopter thing, but how do you think about this? Because in the specialty space, kind of every account, every policy is unique and custom as well. So can you generalize? Can you specialize either? It seems extreme either way.
Yep. And I mean, kicking mine off, I think Charlie made a great point around the, aspect of, how do you balance those two with, the adjuster, right? Because for us, it's not just complex large policies, right? Like we're already typically a standalone inland marine product that is separate from even maybe the carrier or the remaining lines that go with that commercial entity, right? So we may not be their GL, their work comp, whatever carrier they may be having that which they see as their main insurer. We got this specialty area. So from the policyholder's perspective, we're already kind of a step removed. That creates an interesting dynamic. And then just because of the complexity of our claims, it's been a challenge to really kind of say, how can we generalize? So our initial approach, and kind of why I even mentioned the kind of humanization aspect in the beginning with customer experiences, it's been communication. I think if we look at customer experience as a whole, if you can nail communication, again, as some of us mentioned the feature tracker aspect, it's about transparency of info, right? So if they can have it, whether they want to get it themselves or we're proactively providing it from that adjuster, that is the key no matter what. Even if it's a bad message, the experience can still be good if we are proactively communicating, because usually people are frustrated when they have to come get it. So our approach has just been, how can we do that? Even on some of these longer tail claims, it's how can we just always make sure that we are giving updates. Even if nothing has moved, it's how are we providing information just to let them know there's a hold and here's why there's a hold. Like that's been our approach to this point, and trying to say, okay, that's where we're generalizing. And then I think in the specialization aspect, what's a little unique for us is just the expertise that goes into ours. So a lot of times we might be working on something with construction equipment, and this item is either going to get total loss or it's got some salvage value to it. It's interesting to find where our adjusters have built such a rapport with some of our agents and policyholders to the point of, hey, here's what's going to help get you back in business quick. But on the back end, we want to do some digging to see if we can't generate some money back from a salvage or kind of recover money, and then pass that back to the policyholder. I mean, it's been great to where we've had an agent broker want to talk about marketing an account, and the account has stepped up and said, no, we're not moving because of the claims situations that we've had, and calling out adjusters by name saying, we don't want to move this, right? Like we're as long as we're within reason, we're staying here. So it's those kind of situations where you've got to kind of make it custom, but you try to have an overarching generalization on the backside to say, hey, how can we at least be getting that information and communicating as proactively as possible?
Having run a specialty lines claims organization, I hope that those adjusters know that was the case, and they remember that going forward. That is, I think, the biggest win for claims, right? When not only does it go well, but it goes well to the point that the insured wouldn't leave no matter what, even when their advisor is pushing them to look around. That's a great success story. And the power of the customer experience, even if it's bad news, informing them the right things. You see declinations of claims still can get 5-star reviews, and that, I think, is a nice reminder that if you do it right, you inform them, you make those decisions clearly, fairly, even if it's not what they wish it was, they still value it and respect that the experience was a good one. Chris, I love your perspective as because you've seen people try to figure out how to handle this, and you talked about that, having every payment option under the world, under the sun, but then also that can be daunting. So do we generalize and just give one? How do you strike that balance?
Well, it's interesting because even within the carriers themselves, they have different needs to avoid overly generalizing. And one of the best ones I can give you within payments is to offer choice. There's cost involved, right? And certain choices are more costly than others. When you look at where carriers tend to strategically want to do that, they are willing to pass that cost on to third parties, providers, body shops, dental offices, whatever. So the choice is available, but the carrier is not necessarily going to cover the underlying costs for that choice. But for policyholders, they don't want those costs to be passed on oftentimes. So as a vendor to different types of carriers, our payment platform has to be able to offer both an ability to pass those costs on, or in certain cases, if they're looking for that white glove experience, Charlie did a great job of talking about that. You want that experience to be really good. You don't want that person to be contemplating fees when they're getting paid at that point, with those policyholders. So, as we look at designing solutions for this space, one of the things that we've learned over the last several years is to make sure that the platform is dynamic enough so that they don't have to do a separate integration to get both use cases covered. Because most of these carriers are dealing with multiple claim systems. It's complex enough for them to integrate into a new payments platform. And if they have to do that multiple times, you're almost at a dead stop. So you have to support that experience with a set of capabilities that allows for the flexible treatment of different types of payees. And those payees have to be able to be managed according to the carrier's strategic intent. And, that's a case where the industry, particularly the payments platforms that are out there, I don't think has served the insurance space very well, because we didn't, with a lot of the first generation payment platforms, didn't understand intuitively, the differences between the different types of payees. And as we've gone, what I see happening, and one of the most exciting parts of being in this space, is as you're getting into second and third generation platforms, those learnings are baked in. So you're getting the choice, plus you're getting the flexibility to treat different payees differently, all within a single interface, single integration. Carriers don't want to spend scarce IT resources having to program for these things themselves and driving the logic on their end. There's so many other things that they could do other than within the actual payment administration. So that's a good tangible example, I think, of the general question that you were just asking, Brian.
Yeah, and I think it hit on some of the things that, Tina's point about having the flexibility in your systems. You do it once, don't have to, reinvent the wheel each time. And Sapri, there's this call for the burden being put on the IT organization. So I want to turn to you for the next question to start again. It's the first question that we got in from the audience, which is, what change have you implemented recently that you found to have the biggest impact on customer experience? And I'll let you define how recently means.
So
something that stands out.
Yeah, so a couple come to mind, right? Recent being in the last 3 to 6 months, but which for us, we've taken on a major transformation initiative. I think most people end up doing a transformation initiative nowadays, but as Aflac has bought the dental vision organization and is expanding that business, we have a significant agent force, Aflac does, right, that actually goes out and sells the products. And a recent change that we implemented, and it sort of piggies back on the pizza tracker idea, right? communication, right? Of being able to say, well, here's where that application is, here's what the next steps are, and just a little image that says, here's where you're at, here's what's next, here's where's third, here's where's fourth, et cetera, so that they know kind of the overall process as well, and what's coming. Got significant positive feedback on that. The other one that I'll, because that one's not too crazy, but the other one that I want to talk about is really provider focused, and so in that instance, you know, again, from a claims process perspective, there's a claim submission, there's a review, and then there's a payment or denial or whatever the result might be. And so we've generally supported, you know, either 7 days, 14 days, whatever the time frame is to turn around that claim submission to a decision. And we would always have like average information, right? Hey, on average, this is what we do, which is not meaningful if you think about from a provider perspective, right? If the provider is like, well, you're telling me that it's going to take 7 to 14 days or whatever the case is, but I usually don't see it until 30 days. So what's going on? Then it's a matter of, well, I don't trust what you're telling me. And so what we implemented, and the providers have loved it so far, is you got the generic information that says, here's our average. And then here's what we do specifically with your block of business, right? This is your turnaround time for each request that's coming in, the time it takes to review it, the time it takes to pay it out, et cetera. And then, oh, by the way, that is then inclusive of an average for their particular location as well, right? And so now I can, as a provider, if I've got 2 locations, and I can see one location, the turnaround time is, you know, 3 days, but the other location is 14 days. Well, now I can have a meaningful conversation about, well, how do I make them all 3 days to turn around that payment? And then one last feature that we implemented is, right, when you do come to the portal and you see the tracker essentially that shows you these steps and where you're at, instead of leaving it to the consumer and say, well, where am I today for this particular claim? We, again, added a little notch to say, yep, this is where you are. Here's what you should do next, if there is a step even as well, right? Those little tweaks, again, inspired by the pizza tracker, have had a significant positive reaction from the provider community, and it saves them a call, right? It's now, hey, I don't have to call in to get this information. I can go to the portal at any point, 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, whatever the case is, just to see kind of where things are at. And that access and that flexibility of getting that information has been a very positive feedback item for us, as a couple of examples.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to discover that people will engage in their insurance at all hours of the day, and you know, Christmas and Thanksgiving and July.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised.
I hear that over and over again, that people are like, we did so, you know, we launched this digital thing and suddenly we're getting stuff at like 2 a.m, you know, on a holiday. It's like, well, because that's when they suddenly thought of it and had the freedom, and because you met them where they were. So yeah, I'm not surprised by that. Charlie, you guys launched with a very digital and flexible kind of approach to things, but I'm sure that there's been changes along the way. Is there something that stands out more recently for you that's had a big impact?
Yeah, we've done a lot. And as you said, we kind of started off digitally, but a big shift that we've made in the past year is we have changed our claims handling from being exclusively TPA, as most insurtechs do in their early life, to internalizing claims, which is we're hiring our own department to handle our own claims. And with that comes claim system implementation, along with payment solution, things like that. And so the enhancements we've made, in my opinion, have kind of been table stake stuff in terms of virtual estimating. We have omni-channel communication within our claim system. So SMS is one that our customers are really taking to now. And different payment rails, like, electronic payments is obviously, again, it's table stakes here, but there is one that is, we are deploying next month that I'm going to be vague, and I apologize for doing that, but here's the message. We have taken essentially a 10-step process, and 9 of those steps being human, down to 0. And this is something we'll be announcing next month that we're really, really excited about. But this is what I'll say is it's a highly administrative claims process for both the user and our own employees that we have totally automated. And that's, again, like, I know I sound redundant at this point talking about automating the administrative, but we think that is the best use of tech here. and not to allow the users to have a claims experience that is purely AI or things like that. We've just found that it just doesn't work, not only from the industry research, but our own here. So again, I hate to be vague about that. We will actually be doing press about this next month, which we're really, really excited about. So sorry, Brian, I know I'm being
No,
vague.
it's fine. Watch this space. That's we all have a line that we can't cross in terms of what we can share publicly, and it's just too early on that respect. But it is a really good point. This AI human balance, and I'm surprised we don't have a question about that yet. We seemingly always do. Is where do you draw the line there? But I think it's spot on. It's not to say that zero human is necessarily the answer on the entirety of the picture, whether it's claims or whatever. But in some cases, there are pieces of it that should be zero, and there are pieces of it that should absolutely be 100. And where does the total then net out to?
Well, and also understanding, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about customizing, or I should say personalizing the experience, which is a bad idea for P&C because we just have so many. But if you can group your customer base into those personas and then journey map them and understand where those sore spots are within the process, that's how you optimize, right? And that's how you can decide where to insert AI, for example, or to try to do some other kind of automation. That's how we think about it.
Yeah. Tina, what's your thought on this? Is there a recent experience at MassMutual where you've seen a real impact to the customer experience based on something that you've done?
Yeah, there's a bunch I could talk about. I think I'll pick one that has been maybe had the most impact. And that is, I know it doesn't sound big, but it is changing a beneficiary and updating your beneficiary. And it's important because in life insurance, like I mentioned, it's really long, and we were dealing with really old data, and it became an issue when it came time to pay, because we have an obligation to pay that beneficiary accurately. And it meant sometimes ordering old files and digging through paper and looking at old admins that had run on sentences and data wasn't structured appropriately. So how do you even begin to automate a claims process when you're dealing with data like that? And so what we did is we set out on a journey to really make some architectural decisions, some data decisions, and really some guiding principles that were set into place on how we were going to do this. And we decided that what we needed to do is create a gold copy of a data warehouse that housed this data in a very structured way, so that we knew what the PII was. We were breaking apart the first and the last name, and in a way that we could use this data in the future. And then doing this in a way that was fed through APIs in a very scalable way as well. And then we started by turning on the UI for our customers to come in and interact with us in self-service in that way, updating their claims. We pushed adoption of it so that we can get as much data in as possible. And we automated that end to end. So no human needs to touch that. The customer comes in, initiates that from start to finish, from letter or email going out. It is completely automated. And the beautiful thing about that is not only did we lift and create efficiencies in our post-issue back office, we're setting up nicely to begin to automate claims in the end, because we're sourcing and creating a really great gold copy of data. And so that I know it sounds small, but it was big. And then we also started to turn on the UIs in the back end, so that our back end folks, if they were getting requests or if they were doing data cleanup, could write to the gold copy as well. And then we made a really big decision to stop updating admins. Like, we don't need to be, it is old architecture, it's old, it's costly. We're just going to write to one place and pull from one place. And anytime we have a new product, even if it's another line of business like annuity, we can plug right into that piping, and it's super scalable and lightweight. So it's been years in the making, and it has been live for some time, but I think that one was super impactful.
Well, I appreciate you saying you recognize it doesn't sound big, but I think everyone here in the panel and listening has lived with something like that, where outwardly, if you do it wrong, you're leaving the customer with this sense of like, why can't you just do this? And you give them all of the reasons and they don't care, and it's not their problem. And they don't want to hear about, well, the files are sitting in this offsite storage place and we have to that's not their problem for something that seems so simple and basic and has to get done. So it actually is huge. And I think we've all faced situations like that where, to us, we get all the reasons why it's difficult, but it doesn't matter ultimately. And I think that's been the shift in the past couple of years, is we as an industry are starting to recognize, no, it doesn't matter. That's not good enough. We have to do better. And what you're saying is you're now empowering the future shifts that you need to make by letting go of all the things that sort of, stood by the old way of working that were hurting the customer experience. And this, one piece of the puzzle, but much more intertwined than that.
Yeah.
So it is a good example.
And a huge ROI win for the company, because we need by state mandate to pay interest daily on these life insurance products. So it can add up quite quickly.
Yeah. That's a really good example. Mark, what about something from your world that I know you said you're earlier on that journey, so maybe you've had some recent hits because you're starting out on that journey?
Yeah, first I would just say from the conversation with Tina is I feel that's the piece that gets lost. And you guys called that out perfectly, right? It's about the little wins, because I feel customer experience as a whole is the collection of all these little wins, right? Like it's all those touch points along the journey for whether it's a customer or an agent, that add up collectively. And everybody wants the big whiz bang kind of solution that seems sexy on the front end, but the collection of that as a whole is the experience. So I like hearing when those are occurring. It's like, all right, we're chipping away at it. That's all it is, one step at a time. As you said, for us, I'd say on the claim side, we are very early on it. We're at the kind of more of experimental phase from a technology aspect, whether it's leveraging virtual assistants or kind of text messaging within the claim side, or RPAs and kind of the processing of some of those things. The challenge is just due to that complexity. Where does that fit? What's the right investment? Is that the biggest pain point that we can get taken care of for our customers on the claim side? So we're experimenting at that point. I don't think I can even kind of point to a win there, other than that humanizing side that we've done on the front end first. But if I'm going to look at a general customer experience win, I would say it's more on the distribution side for us, kind of low complex, builder's risk type things. It's surprising to me, coming from your standard P&C world, where BOPs, small contractors, all those things have been automated and quotable online and issued online for a decade. And inland marine, low complex is still very manual. So I found out that there are only like not even a handful of companies out there that have a builder's risk product that you could quote and bind online, right? Like this, and that was it. You issued a policy, and that was the end of the digital interaction. It went back to a manual process after that. And for us, we have that like 4 questions. So it kind of makes me think of Charlie talking about branch, where it's very simple to get to your rate and see your overall policy information. But we took it a step further and allowed that full servicing online. Like if you need to do an extension on a builder's risk, or that first notice of loss for claims, and kind of that interaction, that self-service, I'm not aware of anybody else doing that in the market. So for us, that was a good kind of calling point for our agent partners, because it gave them the ability to interact with us when they want to. Now, they're probably not submitting something on a builder's risk on Christmas, like you kind of talked about earlier, but for them, we're nationwide. So when you have people in different time zones, like that flexibility has just been key to see the adoption of that tool. And it's just for one small piece of our product. So we realized that was the first step in realizing where we needed to go down the customer experience journey for our other products and for general solutions as a whole.
And it's a worthwhile point for people to remember, is it's not just CX for the uninsured. Our agents and our brokers, for those of us who are distributed that way, or whatever other partners we have, they deal with this stuff every day, and actually the friction matters to them. There's a carrier that I'm not going to name them here, but they're not represented, but they pay less commission than most of the other carriers in the agencies that they're in, and yet they have a bigger share of those agencies' business than any of the folks who are paying more. And that, to an outsider, that just sounds crazy. It's like, well, you're making less money. Oh, and they also happen to charge a little bit less for premium. So it's like the agents are doubly penalized for placing with them. but they do. And it's because of the friction and the simplicity and meeting that experience needs. So it's not just customers who have that CX bar, it's our distribution partners too. And finding ways to remove that friction and meet their needs absolutely matters as well. It's not just a commission story. Chris, I think you're going to end up getting the last word just looking at the time. I don't think we have time for another question, but I'd love some perspective from you, maybe a recent implementation or solution you've seen where, you know, there's a clear win from a CX standpoint.
So again, I'm going to echo a couple of phrases that my co-panelists have said, in that this seems like a relatively minor improvement, right? One of the things that we had been asked for was to get better insight into the payment disposition, where it's at. Even though the payment may have been issued, the carriers still get questions as to, you know, where's my payment, right? And so one of the things that we did was we provided a disposition output on a real-time basis to the carriers, because one of the things they were telling us is those questions come in through a lot of different mediums. Certain policyholders or providers are old school. They want to talk to a person. They're likely going to get to either an agent or an adjuster or even a customer service department. Those areas sometimes are working off of different systems, different platforms. And so being able to provide a real-time disposition update on where the payment is that can be ingested and put into those various platforms actually gives the party fielding the question the ability to actually give a real-time status update and say, not only did we issue the payment, but you received it in your bank account on X date, or somebody cashed the check on this date, or whatever the case may be. That has been a little bit of a game changer in terms of cost management for the carriers, but also from a customer experience standpoint. We knew it was getting asked for. We didn't expect the benefit to extend as far as it did for that real-time disposition update, beyond just making the, you know, that the payment itself is issued, but, you know, depending on the payment modality that was chosen, there's a lot of different possibilities as to where the status is. Some payment types go quicker, some are slower, some rely on old school snail mail, some of the digital payments even have different timing to them. And so to provide that insight beyond the moment of payment has actually been a minor, what we thought was a minor benefit has actually been bigger than we expected in terms of customer experience.
I love this point around what seems minor, and you know, sometimes you gave us this initial framing of overgeneralization, and the flip side is, you know, the over customization. We also have this low hanging fruit or the big stuff, the big ticket wins, and I think what we're talking about is it may seem small or like low hanging fruit on the surface, but we're missing the real ROI, the real impact. And that's where we ultimately should be focusing our efforts, and then not dismissing it because it may not sound sexy to people, or may not sound like, you know, that was this huge transformation actually into the day-to-day world of our insureds, our partners, our own business, our employees. That was a huge transformation because it's the sum total of all those little cuts that, you know, leave our staff exhausted at night. And maybe, you know, that Sunday night feeling is like, oh, I got to go in tomorrow. When we change the nature of the day-to-day, we really start to create a different experience, and those things add up. It's separate back to your point on the providers. They're then not gonna, you know, you see them kind of deflate when they hear who it is, or you, like I did, you hear like, oh, insurance, we all hate it. We need to change that, and that takes adding up of seemingly small things that actually impact people every day. Fantastic conversation. Sapri, I've been naming you over and over again in this closing, but I do want to call out one thing you said right off the bat, is this notion of like people just sort of leaving it to IT to do the digital stuff. Or Tina, you know, maybe it's you and your role is like, well, just leave it to the digital experience people, like they'll take care of it. Or, you know, even, you know, Mark, your role, or Charlie, yours, that like just handle the claims and then we don't have to worry about the last bit. Or Chris, you know, putting all the pressure on the vendors. It's not any one place. We love reducing things as a society. It's like, just eat kale, you'll live forever. It's something we all have to engage in. Whether you like kale or not, we all have to take this on. We all have to engage in the transformation, the customer experience. It takes every department. It takes every person, HR even, like how are we bringing in the right people to come in to contribute to this, all of that. So thank you so much to the panel. Great points from everybody today. Thank you to the audience. We still have more questions we couldn't get to, of course, but this is something that keeps going. We're not done just because we've made changes. So lots more to do and the bar will keep moving. So I hope everybody continues to engage and we'll see you back for another discussion. Thanks, everyone.